Welcome to this deep dive. We're looking at some really interesting source material you shared with us.
Quite revealing.
Today we're getting into the specifics of a very popular budget car in emerging markets, the 2025 Proton Saga.
It's a fascinating one because the sources, they really cover both sides, don't they?
Mm.
You've got the reported disadvantages, from owner experiences, expert opinion,
Right.
and then the advantages that clearly make it a smart buy for a lot of people in its segment.
Exactly. So our mission here in this deep dive is to help you quickly get a handle on the key trade-offs, the highlights that are coming out of this material, just so you get a well-rounded picture, and fast.
Makes sense.
Okay, let's unpack what the sources are saying. Maybe we start with the areas where it gets some criticism.
Absolutely. So pulling from the common themes, the feedback and the analysis, one thing that pops up a lot is the cabin sound insulation.
Yeah, I saw that mentioned quite a bit. The sources, they talk specifically about how, tire noise, wind noise,
Yeah.
it really gets into the cabin.
Right, especially once you get up to highway speeds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just like the noise level itself. What's interesting is how the feedback links this directly to comfort, ride comfort taking a hit.
Makes conversations harder too, I bet.
Totally. And compared to rivals mentioned in the material, like the Nissan Sunny or maybe the Yaris Sedan, it's apparently noted as being, significantly less quiet.
Okay, so highway comfort is one thing. What about just the feel of driving it? Did the sources touch on the transmission much?
They did, yeah. The Saga uses a 4-speed automatic gearbox.
4-speed.
Yeah, and when you look at what competitors are offering CVTs or, 6-speed automatics, the sources basically describe that 4-speed as feeling pretty outdated for 2025.
And how does that actually, translate for the driver, according to the feedback?
Well, it seems to impact both acceleration and potentially fuel economy. Some drivers specifically mention it feeling slow to respond,
Okay.
which can make city driving or just getting up to speed feel a bit sluggish compared to maybe what you'd expect.
So performance in general then sounds like it's an area where, there are compromises based on these sources.
That's right. It's got a 1.3-liter engine, making about 95 horsepower.
95. Okay.
And the specific number cited for acceleration. It takes over 13 seconds to get from 0 to 100 km.
Wow. Over 13 seconds. So the material basically positions it pretty far from dynamic driving then.
Exactly. The sources are quite explicit, saying this makes it unsuitable for, say, quick overtaking or dealing with really crowded highways where you need that instant punch.
Right.
It's clearly built for a different kind of driving. More sedate, maybe.
Makes sense. Now, moving inside the car, the materials. What do the sources say there?
Well, despite some updates to the design itself, the materials are largely described as, basic plastic.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, the feedback notes there's really no sense of luxury or, particularly high quality. And this is apparently especially noticeable in the base trims.
So you might get a slightly fresher look, but the actual feel is still very much budget segment.
Yeah.
Especially the lower down the range you go.
Precisely. It's one of those really clear indicators of where they're saving costs to hit that low price point.
Right. Safety features another area where the sources seem to draw comparisons.
Yes, and again, particularly in the lower trims, the sources point out what's missing. Things like side airbags, or the more advanced systems like automatic emergency braking or lane departure warning.
And framing that against what some competitors might offer, even in their budget models sometimes, the sources suggest the Saga can lag behind a bit, depending on the trim, of course.
Yeah, it highlights that variability, doesn't it? And what you get safety-wise seems quite dependent on whether you splash out for the higher specs.
Okay. And one last point on this sort of disadvantage side. There was something interesting about resale value in specific places.
Yeah, this was quite specific. Because while the sources often praise the Saga for being reliable, which you'd think helps resale, they also indicate it doesn't hold its value that well in some specific regions. The examples cited were Arab countries, like Egypt or Saudi Arabia.
Interesting. And in those particular markets, the sources contrast it with like a Toyota Corolla or a Hyundai Accent, which apparently hold their value better there.
Exactly. So that's a really crucial point for the total cost of ownership, right? The initial price is low, great, but depending on where you live, that depreciation could actually be a bigger factor than maybe you'd expect for a reliable car.
Okay, so that paints one side of the picture, the areas where the sources point out limitations or, common complaints. But if it has these points against it, why is it still so popular in its segment? especially in emerging markets.
Oh, right.
This is where the other part of the source material gets really interesting, I think. It details a pretty strong set of advantages that clearly drive its success.
Absolutely. This is where you really see that focus on delivering like core value.
Yeah.
Something that just resonates deeply with budget-conscious buyers.
And according to the sources, the number one standout feature has got to be the price.
Undeniably.
Yeah.
Its affordability, its competitive price point, it's presented consistently as the main reason for its popularity.
Just one of the most affordable sedans out there, period.
Yeah.
Especially for the features it does offer.
Right. The sources suggest this makes it ideal for, say, new drivers or families needing an economical second car.
That low barrier to entry, yeah, that's huge.
Incredibly compelling.
And low running costs seem to be another big plus mentioned in the material. Fuel economy.
Yes, definitely. Thanks to that 1.3-liter engine and the relatively simple tech, the sources report really good fuel efficiency. They cite about 5.4 liters per 100 kilometers in mixed driving.
Wow, that's pretty frugal.
It is, which makes it super practical, very cost-effective for just daily commuting, city driving, that sort of thing.
So for buyers really watching the pennies on getting around, that fuel number is a major win.
A huge win, yeah.
What about ride quality? We heard about the noise, but is it actually comfortable day to day?
Well, the material notes that for a budget car, the suspension does provide a comfortable ride, particularly on paved roads. It handles minor bumps reasonably well.
Okay.
And it offers decent stability, too, at moderate speeds.
So it seems like it's designed to do well in its main environment, city streets, decent roads, even if that highway noise is a bit of a factor later on.
Exactly. It delivers the comfort where you probably need it most for typical daily use.
Interior space was also highlighted as an advantage. Surprisingly, maybe.
Yeah, the sources detail a cabin that feels quite roomy for the class and a really practical trunk, 420 liters.
That's quite big for a budget sedan, isn't it? Good for families, shopping, luggage.
It really adds to its practicality, its utility for just everyday life. And the material specifically mentions the rear space is actually adequate for adult passengers.
Which isn't always a given in this size class.
Not at all.
Now, infotainment. This is an interesting one the sources brought up. Important for context.
Right, yeah. And specifically looking at the higher trims, like the Premium S model, the sources mention features that are actually pretty good for this class. You get a 7-inch touchscreen. It supports MirrorLink and Android Auto, USB ports, Bluetooth.
So while the base trims might be pretty basic, if you go higher up, you actually get a decent level of modern tech connectivity. For a budget car, that is.
Precisely. It kind of meets those baseline expectations now for smartphone integration and media access, but within that budget price point.
Okay. And safety. We talked about the limitations earlier, but the sources also made sure to list the fundamental safety stuff that is included.
Yes. And that's important to balance the picture. The material lists things like ABS, that's the anti-lock braking, stops the wheels locking up. It includes EBD, electronic brake force distribution, helps balance the braking. You get ESC, electronic stability control, which is really key for helping maintain control if you swerve suddenly or lose grip.
Standard stuff now, but crucial.
Absolutely. Plus parking sensors, 2 airbags are standard, and hill hold assist HHA, which stops you rolling back on hills.
So, okay, it might lack the really advanced systems you see in more expensive cars, but it does cover the essential foundational safety features you'd expect today.
Correct. The sources describe them as basic, yes, but acceptable for the segment, providing that core layer of safety.
Right. And finally, something really practical for owners. Maintenance and parts.
Yeah, Proton cars generally are noted in the sources for having low operating costs, straightforward maintenance.
And a key factor mentioned was parts availability.
Exactly. Ready availability and, importantly, reasonable prices for spare parts, especially noted in many Arab markets, according to the sources.
And the sources suggest that this ease, this affordability of maintenance, really boosts the Saga's long-term value proposition, makes it less daunting to own.
Definitely. It reduces that sort of financial anxiety around ownership, which is just huge for budget buyers.
So when we pull it all together, what does this complete picture from the sources really tell us? It feels like the 2025 Proton Saga is just a very clear example of that classic value versus compromise equation.
Absolutely. You're getting exceptional affordability, really low running costs, decent space, and the essential features you need for everyday city driving and commuting.
But, and it's a significant but, based on the feedback, you're making compromises. Areas like refinement on the highway because of the noise, the actual performance for quicker driving, the feel of the interior materials.
Right, and potentially some of those more advanced safety features,
Yeah.
depending heavily on the trim level you choose.
So this deep dive into the source material, it's really for you, maybe thinking about a car in this segment. Understanding these specific pros and cons drawn directly from what owners and experts are saying, it's really about helping you weigh up what matters most for your specific needs, your driving environment, your budget.
It's about seeing both sides, isn't it? Understanding precisely why it's so popular in some places, and also understanding the specific limitations that people have actually highlighted.
Looking at the sources, it feels really clear. The Proton Saga, it's aimed squarely at that budget-conscious buyer. The person prioritizing low upfront costs, low running costs, maybe above everything else.
Yeah.
And this deep dive into the material, it kind of makes you think about that fundamental question, doesn't it? When you're considering any big purchase, especially in the budget category, where do you personally draw that line between getting great value and accepting certain compromises?
That's the core question. So what stands out to you after hearing about these specific points, these details from the sources? Is that super low entry price, the great fuel efficiency, the cheap maintenance, is that enough?
Is it enough to outweigh the things like the cabin noise, the feel of the transmission, maybe the performance limitations compared to rivals?
It's definitely something to consider. Think about those points drawn from the material as you weigh up the 2025 Proton Saga and how it might fit or not fit your situation.